Wind carried the scent of juniper and old iron down Main Street as the noon sun burned white over Garnet Creek. The town's paint had worn to bare boards long ago. Storefront signs flapped on tired hinges like tongues that had said too much and been believed too little. A woman stepped from the shade of the sheriff's doorway and let the heat land full on her shoulders, a shock she welcomed. It kept her awake. It kept her honest. The badge at her breast looked heavier in the glare, as if daylight had melted it to the truth of what it meant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Her name was Marin Calloway, and this was the first day anyone in Garnet Creek had seen her wear the star. She stared down the length of the street and mapped it the way a seamstress maps a hem, where to stitch, where the fabric wanted to pucker. Two lines of false-fronted buildings faced each other with an alley like a scar between every other pair. The livery-splintered doors yawning to the left, the Carrion Rose Saloon squinting to the right, the bank's windows glinting with a film of dust that made the glass look older than it was. A telegraph wire sang a single thin note in the heat. Marin let the sound thread into her and out again, the way a breath goes in and leaves changed. It would all have to hold. The boardwalk planks, the stone steps, the people inside them. She thought of the word she had carried like a coin you don't spend because it feels lucky. Sheriff. Out loud, it still sounded borrowed, like boots not yet broken in. The county judge had signed the paper 2 weeks ago in a smoke-choked room that smelled of ink and cheap cigars, and it said with the weariness of a man who expected disappointment, "You keep order in Garnet Creek, Miss Calloway, and maybe you keep order in me." She had shaken his hand and said she would. There was no room left in her life for the luxury of maybe. Bootsteps tapped behind her, lighter than a big man's, truer than a drunk's. Deputy Orrin Pike stopped a polite arm's length away, hat in hand. Pike was a short, neat person with the tidy patience of a clockmaker. He polished his revolver until the bluing took on a mirror sheen that never lasted past the first shot. "Wire from Hemlock. Ryder brought it fast." Marin took the folded message. The paper was sweat-soft. The penciled words pressed too hard. Hurry in the strokes. She read once, twice, then let the wire settle on her tongue the way a chemist tests a suspicious spoonful. Bent Star Outfit cited Southridge, 8 riders minimum, took payroll at Hemlock, headed your way. Leader possibly Cutter Voss. Expect them inside of 2 days. 2 days. That was what the wire said. Her skin, tuned to the subtle warnings of wind and habit, said they'd be here before sundown tomorrow. Men like Voss always came early. They like to find you unready and call it fate. "We're going to spread the word quiet. No speeches, no crowds. Have Bain at the livery move fresh teams to the back corral, keep the front stalls looking used. Tell the Carrion Rose to water the whiskey and call it a special. I want the street looking sleepy and ordinary. I want them to believe the story we're telling until the last possible second." Pike blinked. "Yes, sir, Sheriff." The title landed different on his tongue than it did inside her head. He tried it again, softer. "Yes, sir, Sheriff." He left at a jog. Marin watched him go and kept watching the street after he vanished around the undertaker's corner. She listened to her heartbeat and set it aside. In that empty second, from somewhere no nearer than last winter, but no farther than her own ribs, the old rhythm rose. How to mark a street for a fight. Distances, cover, light, angles. It tried to take her whole attention the way a storm takes tumbleweed, and for a breath she nearly let it. Then she reined it like a half-broke horse and made it stand in the yard of her mind. It could wait. The people could not. She crossed to the general store, where jars of stick candy clouded the window like little weather systems. Anik Wolf, who ran it with a ledger as precise as a surgeon's cut, lifted her chin in greeting, but didn't stop counting nails. That was one of the reasons she trusted her. She knew the difference between hello and hurry. We'll need lantern oil, but let the front of the shelf go half empty. Leave 3 jugs right by the door so a man can see the lack. And salt. Pull the fine sacks, bring up the coarse, stack them waist high, make it look careless. Annick's pencil ticked twice. Cutter Voss? That's the name the wire gave him. Marin set exact change for the oil on the counter. She didn't intend to pay later for anything today. Not with change, not with favor. From the store, Marin walked the boards to the bank. It still smelled new inside, pine sap and varnish clinging to the fresh counter. 2 tellers stood stiff as fence posts. The manager, Lorcan Yule, tidy beard, clean cuffs, tried to smile and produced an expression that made his face look like a mask on the wrong person.
"You'll want to move the mining company's deposit," Marin said before he could start rehearsing his bravery at her. "Not out, down. Leave the counting room door open. Leave a ledger open on the desk. Leave the safe at half-turn so it looks careless. The real cash box goes to the root cellar under the undertakers. He'll mark the lid canned peaches and stack 2 actual peach crates on top. You'll keep only petty in the drawer, enough to be plausible, not enough to make the worst kind of enemy." Yule damped his lips with his tongue. "The undertaker. Uriah keeps the cleanest records in town. He's the only man with a lock no one argues with after sundown." One of the tellers made a noise like a laugh trapped in a throat too dry to carry it. Are we to expect blood, Sheriff?" Marin let the question rest between them long enough to earn its answer. "Expect me," she said. "Let's not borrow anything else." She spent the afternoon the way a careful gambler stacks chips, never flashing, always placing. She walked the alley behind the saloon, where the empty crates piled high could be pushed with a shoulder to make a clattering wall if a man needed to confound a pursuer. She knocked softly at the back door of Dr. Lorene Ash's office and traded a look with the physician that had more steel in it than many men's guns. Lorene was a tall woman who wore her hair cut to her collar and her sleeves rolled to the elbow like a river that wouldn't go around a rock. They had met 3 days ago over a man with a gut wound and a lies problem. The man lived, the liar's died's value in him was cut thin. Marin had learned enough. "I'll need your back room cleared, the table scrubbed twice, and a second set of bandages boiled dry, not just damp. If it goes wrong fast. If it goes right, it still bleeds." Lorene's eyes flicked to the sling by the door and back. "You expect to need the arm board. I expect to make those who hurt this town think twice before they try again," Marin said. It wasn't quite an answer. It was what she had, and Lorene nodded in the way of someone who respects a clean promise more than an easy one. At the livery, Bain Slate listened with his weight tipped on the outside of his boots, like a man who had learned to get out of the way of his own horses. Marin told him to keep 4 calm geldings tied behind the smokehouse, feed buckets on the ground, bridles hung where a hand could find them without searching. "If I tell you to let them go, you let them go on a slap and shout. They'll take the first street east, then they'll look like they're running at first." "Bait?" he asked, without awe. "Lead," she said, "not bait. If anyone follows the horses, they'll be lighter by 4 men by the time the horses fetch up at the creek. The rest will want bottled here." He nodded and did not ask how she meant to cork a bottle. She liked him for that too. By the time the sun leaned toward red, the town had taken on the calm shape of a man hiding a bruise under his collar. Doors that never closed this early closed. Lamps were lit where fire wasn't necessary, but comfort was. On the boardwalk, a mother carried a basket with nothing in it and walked like a full thing not to spill it. No one ran. Running teaches a town the wrong lesson. Marin stood again in front of the office and watched the light climb the bank windows, the saloon's mirror, the brass on the undertaker's bell. Her hands knew exactly where the weight of her revolver lived on her belt and how the leather had started to form to it in just these few days. A craftsperson's satisfaction in something well-made, edging into something more personal. She did not quick draw for practice. She did not sight along alley lines for pretend shots. She held still inside herself until stillness was something she created instead of inherited from the heat. A rider approached from the north this time, a dust-smeared telegraph man she recognized from 2 towns over. He was young enough that shaving would have been a performance for him. He swung down before the office and handed her a folded strip that had picked up someone else's ash finger on its way. Marin read. The wire said, Bent Star 8 to 10, 2 sharpshooters. Cuttervoss likes to open with a show. He prefers towns that shut up early. He puts his men on the roofs. He has a thing about church bells. Keep your bell silent. We'll pray for you. J.K. She felt the short, familiar press of gratitude under her ribs. J.K., Judge Klein, had been many things in his long, splintery life, but careful with women's reputations was not one of them. Careful with their safety, that he had learned late and thoroughly. Pike, she said when her deputy returned from the livery's shade, you and Bain get up to the church steeple, cut the rope ray, and coil it on the landing. Leave the bell there. Don't ring it for any reason short of the end of the world, and even then, count to 5 first. Pike's mouth tugged toward a smile and then away. Yes, Sheriff. And Pike, she added, he paused, and stack 3 of those coarse salt sacks by the bank's rear door. 1 on the sill, 2 on the inside. Make sure they look heavy, but lift easy. He frowned. They'll notice. Good, Marin said. Let 'em wonder about the wrong things. Dinner was whatever her stomach permitted when her mind began to drape quiet over worry the way snow muffles a rail bed. She took coffee at the Carrion Rose and nodded at Calder Finch behind the bar. Finch could keep a room from going faro with 2 fingers and a clean glass, and she'd watched him disarm a man with laughter that was 2 notes higher than his usual and twice as dangerous. Evening, he said, the greeting so plain it was a gift. Heard we're expecting unwashed guests. Tomorrow, if their pride makes them punctual, Marin said. She lifted the cup to her lips, tasted the bitterness, decided it would do. If anyone asks if we're armed, tell them you have a broom and a bar rag and a debt to collect from every man who throws a glass. I do, he said gravely, on the town's behalf. She stayed long enough to hear the low hum of conversation sew itself together through the room. People were arguing about pie like it mattered. As long as it mattered, the town was not yet preparing to die. Back in the office, she set a lamp low and went through her sights. The gun lay on the desk with the gravity of a child asleep in a wagon, too light to be anything like what it might soon become, and too heavy to be lifted without noticing. She wiped the barrel with a cloth that had been clean this morning and didn't think the words that tried to attach themselves to the motions. She let her hands do the old remembering while her mind watched the window and counted clouds. 6. Always 6. She had known men who fought to hear a 7th shot in their lives. None of them had. Her thoughts flicked toward the place she kept shut with the practice of breathing, what the draw felt like when there was no time, the way the world narrowed to a hallway the width of a gun barrel and the length of a man's life. She did not open it. She let the sensation roll against the door and back away. Not yet. Timing was courage's disguise. On the cot against the wall, sleep came in rope-lengths and knots. She took what she could and woke when the town did, just before first light, when the birds were only an idea thinking about itself, when the air held the brief memory of cool like a man holds a letter he hasn't decided to read. She walked the street alone. Dust rolled soft under her boots. The sky had begun to pink at the far lip where scrub met mountain. Windows blinked open. The scent of fry bread slid somewhere out of a kitchen, the kind that told a body it was still on earth and should act like it. She touched the bank door, the saloon's hitching rail, the church's step. Not for luck, for clarity. The world is what it is, and we are what we decide to stand as. She decided again to stand as sheriff.
At mid-morning, the first sign arrived. A crow rose from the south ridge and skated on a thermal, then arrowed west. Behind the ridge, something moved in concert with something else.
She felt it more than saw it, the way a herd announces itself through the ground before the eye can separate hide from shadow. Pike came up from the alley at a run, not breathless, but paying attention to air like a man about to dive. "Ridge dust," he said. "How many plumes?" "Two thick, one thin." He swallowed. "The thin's fast." "Scout," Marin said. "Tell Bain to bring the teams forward now and stand them behind the smokehouse. Send Annex Boy to Laureen with word to keep her door open and the kettle on." Pike vanished with a speed that would have looked like panic in another man. In him, it was craft. Marin stood in the street and watched the horizon draw a line under the sky. Heat jittered in the distance like small truths caught in a liar's mouth. Out of the shimmer, 3 riders surfaced and settled, then 8, then only dust again as the road dipped. When they rose this time, the men had shape. Hats, scabbards, shoulders speaking the careless language of men who believe the future owes them. Marin stepped into the street center and let them do the seeing first. A woman with a badge already arranged inside their heads the kind of story they like to tell around fires. She watched their faces take the bait of their own prejudice. She did not smile. The wind did something new. It turned and carried up to her a smell like penny metal and rancid oil. Her jaw clicked once. Bent Star outfit, sure enough, men who polished their guns more than their souls. The leader wore a jacket too fine for this road, stitched with thread that had never seen a real day's work. He had a face that would have been handsome if someone had taught it mercy. Cutter Voss reined in 20 paces out and looked at Marin as if she were a stray nail sticking up out of boards he intended to walk. He did not dismount. Men like him preferred to look down when they talked. "Morning," he said, and made the word take on a shape it never needed. "We're here for your bank." "That won't fit in your saddlebags. You'll want to be more specific." He laughed as if she had flirted with him. "I like a woman with salt," he said. "Send your men out slow, hands high. Then you can show me the books. I like to see what I'm taking. Feels more polite." A movement to his left on the hotel roof caught her eye. A scuff of boot against gravel, a momentary flash of glass. Sharpshooter, right where J.K. would have put him if J.K. had been an outlaw. She did not look at him again. She tilted her chin toward the bell tower, saw nothing, felt everything. The cut rope coiled like a snake that had decided not to bite. She'd like to thank Pike for trimming temptation out of the day. "I'll show you what belongs to you. Nothing." Voss's smile slipped into the place a man's hunger shows. "That's a hard answer, Sheriff." The title came out like he thought he could tarnish it by saying it. "You want to keep it hard?" He nodded without looking. A man to his rear flicked his reins and peeled off toward the bank door. Marin did not move her head. She let her voice carry past Voss's shoulder to the man like a thrown lariat, and snapped it without raising the volume. "You take one more step, you'll scatter the filling in your teeth across the new varnish, and Mr. Yule will make you pick every bit out with tweezers." The man stopped because his horse did. Horses are braver than men, and smarter too. Voss's eyes narrowed. "You going to do it?" "I'm going to make you decide. That's the part men like you confuse. You think I'm the one doing the making." He leaned forward in his saddle, elbow on the horn, head tilted. "I see what you're reaching for here. You're reaching for a story folks can tell about you after I'm done. Brave little sheriff, stood in the dust, said her piece, died with her boots on." He let the last word hang. He wasn't wrong about the shape of most stories told around campfires. He just wasn't going to get that one today.
"You have 2 sharps on the roofs," Marin said, pleasantly, like discussing flour. "One over the hotel, one above the assay office. The right-hand man is your newer hire. He missed once at Hemlock. Tilts his rifle a hair to the left before he fires, to correct for a quirk that isn't there. He'll kill your own man by accident by winter if someone doesn't teach him to trust his barrel. The other has a good seat and a nervous gut. He'll hold too long on a breath." She rolled her shoulders the tiniest degree, not enough to set off a twitch reflex. "You'll lose both if you start this your usual way. Or you can come down, talk like you mean to leave me and mine breathing, and I'll walk you out of town with nothing but your pride wounded and nobody digging graves." Voss considered the roofs. She watched him do it. When he looked back at her, something like curiosity had replaced the early hunger. "You talk like a schoolmarm, and yet you carry your iron like a man who has learned what it costs to shoot it." She let that sit. The men to his rear shifted their shoulders in boredom that wasn't boredom. One coughed. The sharps on the roof did what sharps do when they're told to wait. They told themselves they were patient while their fingers practiced trembling. Calder Finch pushed the saloon doors with the ease of a man who has observed worse storms and outlived them. He set a broom against the porch railing as if that had been his errand all along. He didn't look toward Marin or the riders. He looked at dust on the porch boards. She felt a line of warm relief draw itself across her knuckles. Everyone was where they had been asked to be. Everyone was doing the precise, ordinary thing that would make the extraordinary harder for enemies to see. "Last chance," Voss said, and straightened in the saddle as if the air above him had demanded it. He raised 2 fingers and dropped them. Marin didn't look up. She stepped, not fast, not slow, left to right across the street's center line until the shot from the hotel roof came. It broke the morning like a bottle breaks. It hit splinters out of the post where her body had been a breath earlier. Her gun was already in her hand from the part of herself that never slept. She did not fire. Not at the man who missed. Not yet. "Drop them," she said, and the edge of her voice had steel against stone in it. Nothing dropped. The second shot did not come because the man over the assay office had realized his friend had missed, and fear seldom follows orders in tidy traceries. Voss's horse shifted its weight. He pulled tight on the reins without thinking and earned the animal's offense. A tiny thing, but a thing men die over. "Now, Bane," Marin said, calm as washing morning cups. Behind the smokehouse, Bainslate slapped 4 geldings on the flank and let out a sound between a whoop and a mourner's cry. The horses bolted around the corner with the clean simplicity of animals following an open door. They thundered up the east side, reins trailing, skittering as if something unseen tore after them. 2 of Voss's men, in that hungry male habit that confuses motion with threat, split from the line and chased the movement because chasing is easier than thinking. They left their slots ragged. "Pike," Marin said. 2 sacks of coarse salt tipped from the bank's rear door and burst under the boots of the men who had swung to follow the horses. Salt under dust slides slick, whiter than ice, treacherous as promises. The men stumbled, cursed, and their curses made them slower. A breath later, the sack on the sill fell and split, and the doorway became 2 things at once, open and impossible. It forced the men to choose where to put their hands, on their guns or out to save their faces. Men whose hands are busy falling don't shoot well. Cutter Voss's smile tightened to something brittle. "You rehearsed that," he said. "I do my work," Marin said. The old rhythm inside her pressed forward, and this time she let it, not like a flood, but like a trained river through a sluice. She did not so much draw as return her hand to its natural shape. Her first shot took the hotel roof sharpshooter's rifle clean through the stock where it met the barrel, wood and steel parting like a bad marriage. He cried out, more in surprise than pain, because he still had his hands, and most men in this country value those above anything they ever believed. "Enough," she said, to the sky and to the street, and to herself most of all. Cutter Voss put his weight forward, as if the saddle horn could tell him what to do next. "You fancy," he said softly enough only she could hear. "You're fast. I can respect fast. I hired fast. But fancy gets you killed. Fancy makes a man, and whatever you are, believe your spine is iron." He lifted his hands to shoulder height, empty. He smiled with his teeth. "Parley," he called. "We'll parley." Men in his outfit glanced at each other, and then at Marin. No one trusted the word. They trusted the shape of the guns. She watched Voss's fingers for twitch rather than aim, the way you watch a rattlesnake's neck, not its mouth. He swung down smoothly, boots touching dust, like he had to prove to someone he could. "We walk," he said. "You and me. 20 paces. We talk about the price of peace. I've paid it at Hemlock. I can pay it here." He nodded at his men, and 3 of them backed their mounts without turning. A small manners that looks like respect until you notice where the eyes go. Up, to the roofs. "The men on those rooftops fire," Marin said, "and you'll die before the second report. If you want to test my belief in that, test it quick. I'm running out of appetite for your voice." Sharp tongue. Voss's eyes held something new now. Something like calculation shading into curiosity. "Who taught you to count men by how they breathe?" "Standing in a doorway," she said, "counting who I'd have to bury if I didn't." They walked. 20 paces is not far unless the ground between is the only ground between living and lying down. The town held its breath, the way a body holds air while a knife passes over skin to see if it means to cut. At 10 paces, Voss angled his body just so. It wasn't much. It was enough to tell her where his hidden iron lived. Vest, left, small derringer with a bored barrel. Men like him think an ace in the waistcoat is smart, when in truth it's only habitual. She let her hands hang open and let her lungs learn to want less air. When you want less air, your body stops telling your brain that it must have more, and you can watch. "Your judge friend, Klein?" Marin didn't give him the word. He didn't need it to feel right he'd guessed. "That old man has thrown a lot of women into hard places and asked them to build houses there. Looks like you brought lumber." "A roof first," she said. "Always a roof." She hadn't meant to say any of it. It came out like a breath. He smiled as if she paid him a compliment he could pocket. "You could work for me," he said. "I've taken worse men than you into my outfit and taught them how not to shake when they hear their own heart. You'd be my best investment. I'd give you the bank and take the town." "You can't own a thing you don't respect," she said. "You can only keep it while people are looking at something else." He inclined his head, a small bow that would have looked gentlemanly in another life. "You're going to make me kill you," he said like a private joke that had gotten out of hand. She felt it then. The hairline change in the street's tone, the way a crowd changes pitch the heartbeat before a fight starts in a dance hall. She did not look. She did not need to. The sharps on the assay office roof had solved his fear by trading it for anger. Anger is bad math. It makes a man spend 2 bullets where 1 and a breath would do. He was going to take that second shot because his first man had lost his gun, and pride hates a lesson. "Don't," Marin said, and the word went up to the roof and down Voss's spine and across the distance to the bank. It was not a plea. It was a measurement. She could feel the pressure of choices pushing against each other like boards in a water barrel that had soaked through. The second shot cracked from the hotel roof, meaner than the first, a little heavy on the front end. Marin's hand moved because she had taught it not to ask permission from fear. Her pistol barked once, and the sharpshooter above the assay office howled. His rifle kicked from his grip to the street below. In the same breath, no time for breath, really, the hotel roof man who had lost his rifle went for the pistol he had told himself he wouldn't use. His hand shook, and the barrel swung toward a window where a face had appeared and vanished, the kind of face that ruins a town if a bullet finds it. Marin shifted a half-inch, just a half, and fired again. The bullet took the pistol's hammer clean, and the shot that should have gone into glass and meat went instead into the sky like prayer. "Enough," Voss said again, but this time it wasn't a command. It was the kind of word a man says when he realizes his plan is no longer his. He flicked his wrist, a movement prettied by too much practice, and the little derringer came into his palm from his vest like a fish surfacing. Marin saw the gun and the dust mote floating in the light between them, and the vein in his neck and the ridge of her own thumbnail where she'd bitten it the night her badge arrived. She saw everything, and exactly what it meant. She let the world shrink to the instant a trigger gives. Somewhere behind her, Bain shouted a word she couldn't hear. Somewhere to her left, Pike's boot scuffed because good men forget to breathe when it is not their time to die but appears it might be their friends. She anchored her heels in the dust and made the whole town fit in the space between Voss's eye and the notch of her rear sight. She did not think of Judge Klein. She did not think of Laureen's sleeves or Calder's broom. She thought of a roof first, and a door that locked, and bread cut straight, and a bell that did not ring for deaths that could be traded for hours. She thought of Garnet Creek sitting up tomorrow and saying, "We are still here." Voss's finger tightened. The Derringer's little mouth opened like a liar about to speak. Somewhere high to the left, a glint of glass flashed. A third rifle? No, a mirror, the sort men use to see a street without being in it. Her mind made the turn and her body followed, shoulders shifting, knees bending, weight moving toward the safer of two bad choices, because that is what a sheriff does, chooses, and makes it right afterwards. The Derringer coughed its little mean sound. A window behind Marin spat slivers. She felt something like a hot hand claw past her ribs, a near thing, but not the worst thing. She drew a breath and tasted metal. "Drop it," she told Voss, and heard her own voice as if from down a hallway. "Or I take your hands and spend the rest of my days knowing I could have let you dig a ditch instead." His eyes went dead calm. Some men get louder at the edge. Voss got quiet. He smiled, and the smile this time reached his eyes and freeze burned there. "You're better than the stories," he said. "That disappoints me." He flicked his gaze over her shoulder like a man accepting a toast from behind the bar. "Now," he said to someone not visible. The second rifle cracked from the hotel roof, and Marin turned toward the flash, toward the line of sight that would solve itself into barrel, breath, and the soft human wobble of doubt. The hotel roof printed a jag of sun across her eyes. She slid right, let the porch post take the next splinter, and felt dust kiss her cheek like a warning. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The shot's echo chased itself up Main Street, clattering off windows and lamplit. Marin didn't look at the glass or the sky. She looked at hands and feet and the thin seam where a man's decision shows before the gun does. Cutter Voss's Derringer smoked once in his palm like a snake that wished it were bigger. On the hotel, a hat brim sank. On the assay roof, the second sharpshooter's courage made a small noise and sat down in his throat. "Hands," she said to Voss, without raising her voice. She felt her own left side complain where the Derringer's skittering shot had scraped a breath too close. Hot, but not deep. The kind of pain that is mostly information. Voss's mouth went almost kind. It was the kind a wolf has for a lamb that doesn't run. "Your men," he murmured. "Look again," she returned, and did not have to check. She knew where Pike had gone without seeing him. The bell tower landing, kneeling on ropes so it couldn't whisper itself down the stairs. Bain in the alley with a hand on a calm gelding's cheek. Calder Finch still sweeping, moving sawdust into a brighter pile, smiling as if morning were ordinary. On the bank's back step, the busted sacks of coarse salt had made an ugly kind of snow. Two bent star riders tried to act like men and not like bodies, forgetting where they began. Their boots fishtailed and their hands went out. She didn't shoot men falling. She didn't have to. Falling did most of the work. The hotel roof cracked again. She moved before the sound and felt the air fattened beside her ear. Her own shot came as an answer, not a shout. One stroke, clean, the kind that takes a weapon out of a man's life without taking the man. Wood leapt from the rifle's stock and clattered down shingles. The shooter flinched and flattened and stayed there, hands on the roof as if he meant to hold the building to the earth. "Parley's over," he said. And the soft was worse than the shout would have been. He palmed the Derringer back to his vest like he'd been born doing it. "Now we finish." He turned his head a whisper's width,
and the 3 riders he had edged back earlier peeled wider, giving the street a shallow, bold shape with Marin at its bend. She could feel distances settling like cards in a dealer's hands. 20 feet to the hitch rail, 30 to the bank door, too far to the doctor if she needed a table ahead of schedule. "Pike," she called. Not because she needed him where she could see him, but because she needed him to know she still knew his name. A scrap of shadow moved in the steeple slit. That was enough. 2 Bent Star riders kicked their mounts for the bank again, trying to look eager and landing on clumsy. Marin broke left. Her boots knew how to step without tripping over themselves. The first rider tried to aim a shoulder at her like he could knock the badge off by chance, but she put a bullet into his horse's bridle cheekpiece instead. Leather popped, iron jounced, the animal blown free of a bad idea before it turned into a broken leg. The rider grabbed mane with both hands. Men grabbing mane don't draw. "Cutter," she said, because saying his name with no title put them on a ground she liked better. "Call them off." He smiled because he had decided long ago that smiling would do better for him than thinking. "You're fast," he said again. "I'm faster with 10. "You're slower with a plan that's already bleeding," she said, and watched the thought land behind his eyes. The plan had been roofs and bell, fear and spectacle. The plan had been a town that rang itself to pieces. She had cut the rope and left the bell where it was. She had salted the back step and left the front door open to curiosity. She had made ordinary look like a wall. Voss touched his hat brim like a man acknowledging something he'd rather not. "Rafe," he said, without looking. "Smoke her." Smoke meant fire. Fire meant kerosene. Kerosene lived in every western town like a second water. Marin didn't look for the source. She smelled it by the bank's side. Somebody had found a lamp can behind Anik Wolf's general store and decided to make an argument with it.
"Calder," she called, and did not need to finish. Finch disappeared into the carrion rows and came out with the big mop tub sloshing. He walked like a man carrying a baby, careful and quick. A Bent Star rider skated his horse sideways to block him. Calder didn't break stride. He tilted the tub to the right at the last step, spilled a wave at the animal's feet, and spoke a single word the horse recognized as permission to move away from trouble. The horse obeyed. Men like Voss forget the 3rd or 4th smartest creature on a street often does the deciding. Calder poured the rest across the oily smear waiting to be flame and turned it to a sulky rainbow that wouldn't catch. Voss's eyes narrowed. "You gonna spend all day protecting other men's money?" "Not money," she said. "Names on ledgers. People." He made a "you wish" kind of sound and cut his eyes toward the hotel roof. The man belly flat there had a pistol out now, both hands on it like prayer. The barrel swung and trembled and settled. Marin dipped a hair as if she were bowing to an invisible partner. The shot snapped air where her head had been. She rose in the same move and stitched the pistol from the man's hand with a strike that was more scold than sentence. He cursed and clutched and kept all his fingers. Good. Fingers did work. Work made change. "Enough," Voss said, and this time the word had edges again. He raised his left hand shoulder high and let it hang. It was not surrender. It was a cue. 2 more riders detached from the line and walked their horses toward the church. The bell's mouth gaped black in the steeple. She could not see the rope she knew wasn't there. She could see the glint in one man's hand, a tin of blasting caps like a pocket full of teeth. Mining company money. Blasting caps would be easy pickings. Marin moved without announcing it, because announcing is what you do when you need witnesses. She needed a clean angle. She cut between hitch posts and under the shadow lip of the saloon roof, counting steps. 10 to the churchyard gate, 8 if she took the boardwalk and trusted the planks not to give her away. She took 6 and jumped the last 2. Her knee barked, she told it later, and kept going. Pike stepped out of the chapel door as if he had always lived there and carried a broom like a rifle. The riders looked surprised enough to tell her all she had to know. Voss had expected emptiness and echo. He got a deputy with tidy eyes and a jaw set to useful. "Morning," Pike said to the men as if they had showed up early to help with pew dust. He did not even look at their hands. Men hate not being looked at when they mean to be dangerous. The one with the caps tried to fumble dignity. "Sheriff said," Pike licked the broom tilt as if it needed resting and let the bristle end point where a man's belly turns brave into water. "Sheriff said a lot of things, and you missed most of them. Leave the tin." Marin was 2 breaths away now. The rider on the left twitched a boot heel to make his horse step up and through. She put a bullet into the bell's rope hole where wood had darkened from years of pull. The splinter and ring the shot made wasn't a sound men are built to ignore. The horse hesitated. Pike took his chance and stepped close enough to tap the cap man's wrist with the broom handle. Not hard, right. The tin left the man's hand and fell, and Pike's boot slid over it like a lid.
"Leave," Marin said from the yard gate. She could feel Voss looking at the scene from the street, could feel his smile trying to decide whether to be admiration or anger. "Or I start charging rent for the view." They backed their horses. It was ugly. It didn't matter. Backing is still leaving. She and Pike met eyes without moving their heads. He had a line of sweat over one eyebrow that glowed like a brand. He lifted the broom a half-inch to show her the thin copper thread he had wrapped along the handle's length and the tiny bell clapper nail he'd driven through. His own quick invention, an alarm inside an ordinary stick. Marin felt the little spark you get when someone surprises you in the direction you'd hoped they would. "Back to your roost," she said. "Yes, sir," he answered, and when he said it he did not mean sir. He meant sheriff. Back on Main, Voss had dismounted and given his reins to a younger man whose eyes moved as if they'd been taught to look everywhere but home. Voss stood square in the dust, with his boots planted too neat. Men who put their feet on lines like that either grew up with drill or a father who liked to bruise where the belt didn't show. She filed the information. She did not let it soften him. "You're running me out of ideas," he said, almost conversational. He was close enough now that she could see where the fine thread in his jacket had started to fuzz at the cuff. He'd bought it to be looked at. He'd worn it to be believed. "You walked yourself out of them," she said. "I only moved the furniture." He glanced at the bank door as if the wood might decide to be a friend. "We take the inside," he said quietly, and she knew then what he would do because it's what men do when the outside goes wrong. They turn inward and set a match. He was going to make Garnet Creek hurt itself to stop him. "Lorene," she whispered to the air, and the air did what a good town does. It carried the right name to the right person. The doctor stepped into her doorway 2 buildings down, sleeves rolled, eyes seeing too much. Marin barely moved her hand and Lorene read the signal as if it were a medication note. Back, now, lock. Voss raised his chin and made a small circle with his forefinger, the kind of pretty gesture you learn playing cards with men who fight slower than they talk. 3 of his riders lifted bottles with rags in them. Where had the rags come from? Annex waistband? The livery's rag bag? Marin's stomach drew itself thin. Fire is everyone's business and no one's until it is the whole town's. "Colder," she said, and the barkeep already had the mop tub back with a second brother. Bain and Annex boy appeared with wet sacks. Pike's shadow slid in the steeple like a lighthouse mark. Marin sighted right. Not at a man, at a bottle. She broke it in the thrower's hand mid-arc. Liquor sheeted and flamed in the air and turned to angry nothing on wet boards. She took the second the same. The third man got his rag alight. She shot the wrist that held it clean through where a hole makes a hinge stop being one. The bottle fell and burst in wetness and reset itself as a harmless stink. "Enough," Voss snarled, and now the word had tar on it. He snapped his head and 2 men went for the bank door at a dead sprint. Marin didn't chase them. She ran for the alley between the bank and the undertaker, where the root cellar bulkhead sat looking like 2 tired doors that had always been there. She didn't have to open them to know they were locked. Uriah would have sprung the heavy hasp himself and sat on it with that placid mortician's patience he wore like an apron. The Bent-Star pair didn't go for the bulkhead. They went for the window above the counting room, glass thin, sash newer than the rest of the bank. They went feet first, clumsy and determined, breaking glass into ribbons and shouting about how brave they were so they wouldn't have to feel it. Inside, Lorcan Yule made a sound a man makes when his worst day becomes true in the exact shape he feared. He put his hands up, because people believe hands are what save you. Hands didn't save anyone today, unless they were doing calm work.
Marin went up the alley wall like she had been building that climb all morning. Boot on barrel hoop, boot on windowsill, fingers at the roof lip. She didn't pull herself onto the roof. Too open. She slid along the wall and found the office window where the Ledgers lived. Inside, she could see the street-side desk and a sliver of Yule's sleeve, and two men hauling the counting room door shut as if glass could become a vault if you believed hard enough. She rapped the window once with the butt of her gun. Not hard, just enough to teach the glass to return sound. "Yule," she said. "The drawer." "What?" he croaked. "Petty cash," she said. "Tip it." His hand shook and obeyed. The little coins went like rain over the floorboards. Men who have just climbed through a window will step where their eyes tell them to, not where their weight should. The larger of the two Bent-Star riders put his foot down and slid. His knee buckled, and his mouth turned into a boy's for one raw second. Marin took the hinge of the door instead of his heart. The counting room door wouldn't close right now. It would drag and catch and telegraph its failure. The second rider swore and tried to be better than he was. He failed at a man's usual speed. She kept her shoulder against the wall and used the window glass as sight. Through the shimmer, she placed one shot at the sash lock on the inner office door. The lock snapped, the door fell open and hit the back of the first rider's head with an authority he'd remember longer than his name. Yule ducked, with a little sound like a prayer getting its hat snatched, and Marin took the moment to drop to the ground again. She did not want to be in the window when a scared man remembered he had a gun. Back in the street, Voss had changed shapes. He had shed the smile and put on the face men wear when they mean to look like a lesson. He stalked toward her with an odd, perfect calm that said he had left considering behind and arrived at deciding. "You keep taking pieces. I'm going to take something whole." She thought of Laureen's neat handwriting on tincture labels. She thought of Pike's copper wire on a broom. She thought of Bain's soft word to a horse and Calder's ordinary buckets. Whole. The only whole that mattered to him now would be a person. "Don't," she said. But the don't wasn't to him. It was to the world. It was to Chance, and Chance does not listen, but sometimes pretends to. He lifted his hand. The young rider with the restless eyes spurred to the doctor's door. Too fast. The horse slid on wetted dust and checked itself. The boy leaned to grab Laureen's arm. She disappeared backward, and the door slammed and the bolt thunked. The boy hammered his fist on it like a child denied a sweet. Marin aimed for the baseboard under his boot and put splinters in his shin that would teach him respect for doors. "Try again," Voss said to the air, and two other riders shouldered toward Anik Wolf's storefront instead. Marin felt her focus widen, dangerous but necessary, and let the world in an inch more. A shape moved at the end of the boardwalk. Anik herself carrying nothing weighty, only a yard broom. She looked at Marin and not at the men, and then she looked at the nails she had hammered high on her doorframe 10 minutes after Marin first took the badge. The nail held the loop of wire.
God bless tidy people, Marin thought, and didn't aim at all. She just gave Anik a nod. Anik reached up, flipped the loop, and let the spring latch fall. The door swung out instead of in. The riders, leaning in to throw shoulders, met empty air, stumbled, and gifted gravity their dignity. They went down in a tangle of boots and pride. Anik stepped over them and aimed the broom where it would hurt neither her nor the men enough to change anything important, but enough to change their minds. "Enough," Voss said a third time, and now the word tore. He turned to the hotel and made a cutting motion with his hand.
The man who had dropped his rifle earlier crawled to the roof's edge and hooked something over the gutter. Rope. Not bell rope, darker, newer. It went down the wall to a parcel in a canvas wrap. The parcel had very straight sides for something on a hotel wall. Straight enough to be a box. Straight enough to be a box of powder. A dead hush fell behind Marin's ears, the kind that comes when a memory tries to stand up in the middle of a day. She did not let it. She listened to the present instead. She could hear distinctly the small clink of caps in a tin 2 buildings away. She could hear Calder's breath coming even and the horse's breath coming aware. She could hear the rope rasp. She could see Voss's eyes on the parcel, not on her. She shot the rope where it went over the gutter. The bullet cut strands, the weight took the rest. The parcel fell the last 8 feet and hit the dust, bounced once, didn't break. Not blasting powder then. Greener. Gelignite, mining company's new trick. Voss's mouth quirked. "You learn fast," he said. "So do I," she answered, and moved. He lunged in the same breath, one hand at the parcel, the other at his belt knife. He meant to cut and toss and write Garnet Creek's future with an explosion. She put her heel on the parcel as his hand reached it. They both went still as if surprise had more authority than a judge. "Move," he said very quietly. "Bring your men and pick a different town." The thin skin between quiet and chaos tore. One of the Bent Star men on the bank roof panicked and fired toward where he imagined Pike must be. The bullet hit the bell housing with a clang that made air into a blade. In that same instant, the hotel roofman, shaking and angry, tried a third shot and found his courage a fraction stronger than his aim. The round took the corner of the Carrion Rose's lintel and spat stone. The world jolted sideways and kept going. Voss chose. He chose badly. He threw his knife left-handed, quick and pretty, and reached low with his right to yank the Gelignite free from under her boot. She let him have the knife. It slashed her sleeve and kissed the meat of her forearm with a fast, hot mouth. She gave him the parcel and took his wrist. She turned his reach into his stumble the way a woman learns to when men in hallways get proud. He folded because his body wanted to, not because she demanded it. And the parcel lurched up and would have gone high if her heel hadn't come down again. It didn't. It went sideways. It skittered to the gutter, bumped and stopped between a horse's iron hoof and the curb. Every man on the street held his breath at the same time. It made a sound like a book closing.
"Don't be stupid," she told Voss without looking at him. It was as much to herself as to him. He laughed once, a slice of sound with no joy in it, and shouted, "Now!" to nobody in particular and everybody at once. Something answered from the south alley, hoofbeats too many to be the men already here. Marin's skin went cold where the sun hadn't reached. She lifted her eyes to the far ridge and saw dust that wasn't theirs, another string of riders, not townsmen. Bent Star left-behinds, late to the party, eager to show they could still be invited. "Pike," she called, and then "Calder," and didn't bother to shape the rest because good men fill in their names with the right actions when the time is too thin for words. The second wave came in ragged, the way hunger runs when it smells meat. Voss stepped back from the Gelignite, calculation beating anger by the width of a breath. He didn't want to be the one standing over it when a green hand made a bad spark. Marin drew down on the leading rider of the new lot and planted a bullet in his hat brim where it met his skull without entering the skull. It was not mercy. It was instruction. He swore and swerved. The men behind him swerved, because men behind always think the one in front knows more. They tangled each other's reins and turned their line into a question mark. Pike's broom sounded in the bell tower, once, metal on nail, his little alarm trick. Then again, faster, warning and measure both. Bain popped a backlot gate and sent the spare geldings through like a white wave at the new rider's knees. Calder did something quiet with a door and a bolt that made a space open where there hadn't been one.
Anik lifted a second spring latch and turned her storefront into a hinge. "Stop this," Marin told Voss, and hated how much she wanted him to be a man who could. He smiled a small, ruined smile. "You want me to be better than I am. That's not the kind of wanting the world rewards." "Sometimes it is," she said, and put a bullet into the hotel's gutter an inch above the gelignite, sending down a rain of tin and dirt that made the parcel disappear under a fresh spill. It wouldn't detonate from dirt. It would just sit there, like a promise that could be kept or forgotten, depending on the next breath. The next breath was full of riders. The Bent Star latecomers washed into the street with a noise like an argument. Voss pointed at her, and then at the bank, and then at the doctors, a three-point plan in one dirty gesture. The men split without discipline, 2 toward her, 3 toward the bank, 3 toward Loreen. That left 2 watching Voss with the loyalty of dogs who hadn't learned what happens when you follow a man who thinks only of his teeth. Marin stepped forward, because stepping back teaches the wrong lesson. The first rider at her lifted his revolver high, wild. She shot the pistol out of his hand and the shock out of his brain. The second tried for clever and leaned low, sideways, aiming for her feet. She put one into the saddle's horn, so his lean became a lie. He slid. He put his shoulder into the dust, and dust took him in like a patient thing. At the bank, one of the men tripped on the coins still scattered and fell hard enough to learn about floors. The second vaulted him and tried to get his boot through the counting room door. The door, now dragging and stubborn, welcomed him with a bone-slicing kiss. He screamed and reconsidered. The third threw an elbow at Yule through the opening. Yule surprised Marin. He ducked right and swung a ledger like a brick. The man grunted and reached both hands to his nose. Men touching their nose don't shoot either.
At the doctor's, the 2 riders found the bolted door and the quiet behind it. Quiet is terrifying when you've decided you're owed noise. One of them tossed his weight against the frame. It held. The other peered through the side window and saw only the empty whiteness of a scrubbed room. He put his fist through the glass because breaking is a language men learn young. He pulled it back bloody and learned another language at once, consequence. "Cutter," Marin called from the center of the street. She wasn't sure why she was still calling him by the name his mother hadn't given him. Maybe because you fight the thing a man wants to be as much as the man. "Look at me." He did. In his eyes, she saw a calculation run and fail and start over. He could call his men off and leave with half his teeth. He could make a legend here and die for it. Some men can read themselves. Some can't. He was trying. "Your line's broken," she said. "You don't have high ground. You don't have the bell. You don't have my people. All you have is a box under dirt and pride enough to light it." "Maybe pride is all a man needs," he said. "It's the last thing he should spend," she said back, and heard how tired she sounded, and decided to keep the truth of it. He slid his eyes toward the gelignite. The dirt had half hidden it, but not enough. One of his latecomers saw the look and did what young men do when they get handed meaning. He rode for it with his head low and his mouth open. Marin ran, not toward the box, toward the horse. She lined the shot along the horse's front shoe and put iron into dust. The horse planted to keep from breaking itself. The boy went on alone and made a shape in the air men don't forget. He hit with a noise that made some of the Bent Star men flinch and some of them laugh. The ones who laughed were the ones most likely to die young. "Stop," she said to Voss, and heard the scrape in her throat where fear had rubbed. Not fear of him. Fear of what she would have to become to end him. His face shifted like a deck of cards getting cut. He bared his teeth. "Take her," he said to the 2 men closest to him, and added to her like a man offering hospitality, "Alive if you can." They came. They were not his best. His best had learned enough to hesitate around her. These wanted an easy story to tell after. She gave them the only story available. the one where a woman moves left when a man expects right, and stoops instead of straightening, and uses his momentum as if she had been holding it for him all morning. One man kissed a hitch post with his teeth. The other discovered how lamplights feel to skulls. The third time the word enough came in the street, it wasn't Voss's, it was Pike's, and it rang from the bell tower landing like a thin, true coin. "Enough!" he shouted. "Sheriff!" She looked up. He was pointing not down into the street, but out beyond the south ridge. Dust. Not Voss's. Not latecomers. A shape moving with the steadiness of men who weren't hurrying because they never had to. Company men? No. Company wagons breathe different. Law. Too soon for a county posse. Her mind went once around the box of possibilities and came back with the things she had marked and set aside because she didn't like to believe in it. Ben Starr's friends from farther east, the ones with the big hats and the 5-point star that wasn't earned in any courthouse she respected. Men who wore badges like theater.
Voss saw it too. His chin lifted a hair, and his eyes did a tiny calculation she almost missed. Reinforcements if he could last. Witnesses if he couldn't. He smiled again, and the smile this time looked like a man who had found his way back to a road he trusted. The road where someone else did the choosing. "Time's up," he said, and his right hand dropped toward his hip. She saw the twitch that precedes a draw, the way the tendons in his wrist stood like fences. She saw the street's straight mile of light between them, the bright edges of roofs, the gelidmites blur under dirt, Pike's pale face in a window slit, Loreen's shadow motion behind a white curtain, Calder's stillness like a promise at the saloon door. She saw all the choices and picked one she would have to live inside forever. Her hand moved not as fast as a legend's, but as fast as a life's practice. Their shots were almost one sound. Voss's round shaved the wind by her left cheekbone. Hers shaved the bottom of his holster and bit the leather enough to cut his second try off before it began. His pistol stuck in its own house. He pulled and cursed. She stepped in and kept him busy. He grabbed and became heavy. She turned and gave him ground that was trap, not gift. Men like him always thought any ground given was a mistake. It wasn't. Then the bell rang. It should not have. She had cut the rope. Pike had sat on it with his tidy weight. But the sound that came now wasn't rope. It was bullet on bronze. A long, torn peal that rolled into every doorway and under every bed and into the part of a town where fear keeps its suit ironed. The man on the bank roof had finally decided he wanted music. He had made it with his gun. Men moved to the sound the way men do, halfway choosing, halfway chosen. Voss wrenched his pistol free of the cut holster and fired wild toward Pike's tower. Marin hit his wrist the way she'd hit the others. A small breaking, a big lesson. The shot went into the bell again. The bell's chain screamed. It jumped in its yoke and came back down wrong. "Down!" she shouted. And it wasn't to Pike or to Voss or to the street as much as to the day itself. The bell tore loose. It fell slowly in the way heavy things fall, leisurely, then in a rush at the end. The chain whipped, the yoke let go with a sound like a horse's neck breaking. The bronze mouth dropped toward the boardwalk and the peak of the hospital's porch roof, toward the place where Loreen had just opened her door to drag a wounded man inside, toward the Jellic Knight's new dirt cover in the gutter, toward the center of a story that had learned to want the shape of catastrophe. Marin ran under it. She did not have a plan fully formed enough to be called that. She had 3 impulses and a body that knew what to do with them. Push Loreen, kick the parcel deeper, take the bell's edge on something that would break and not be a skull. She threw her shoulder into Loreen's ribs without apology. She felt Doctor's breath leave Doctor's lungs in a burst.
She swung her boot and moved the dirt like a mean plow. Shoving the parcel half under the boardwalk lip, she grabbed the leaning porch post and yanked. Wood complains before it fails. It told her it was going to. She took that knowledge and spent it. The post came 1 inch, then 2. The bell hit the porch roof with a sound like 2 trains fixing to hate each other. The roof groaned. The post gave the 3rd inch, and then it didn't anymore, because some things are done giving. The bell slid. Its rim caught the post she'd loosened. It changed direction a fraction. The fraction was the difference between the hospital doorway and the dirt at her feet. It hit the street and rolled, not like a hoop, but like a smashed world, slow and ugly and unstoppable. It kissed the Gelignite's new dirt cover like a blessing and kept going, taking the last of its rage out against the bank's step. The street went silent, and then filled itself to bursting with sound. Men shouting, horses screaming, Pike yelling from above without words, Voss cursing in a language that wasn't English and probably wasn't anyone's prayer either.
Maren lay on her back, staring at sky, and felt the gritty throb where her forearm bled, and where her shoulder would purple, and where her ribs were going to tell her secrets if she pressed them later. Lorene bent over her and said, "You're an idiot," in a voice thick with relief. "Later," Maren said and rolled up. "Now we end this." She stood. Cutter Voss stood too, as if the ground were a spring. They looked at each other the way 2 stories look at the same ending and pick different endings anyway. You can still walk. You can still take what you've learned and use it, or you can insist on the one lesson you seem to love. He breathed once, slow, tasting the air like a man cataloging a last meal. "I insist." His eyes flicked to the gutter where the Gelignite lay half hidden. His hand followed his eyes. He meant to pull and light and throw and finish it with a flourish. Men like him need flourishes. They think they're punctuation. They're only stains. Maren raised her pistol. She did not aim at his heart. She did not aim at his head. She aimed at the thin triangle of space between his thumb and first finger, where a man's grip begins to tell the truth about him. She fired. The gun leapt. Voss's hand opened because hands do what nerves tell them to. The parcel popped free and slid 2 feet. It turned and stopped with its fuse nipple grinning at the sun like a rotten tooth. A shadow fell across it. Bane Slate's boot. "Figured it needed shoeing," he said mildly from the edge of her hearing, and ground his heel. Voss made a sound that tore something in him on the way out. He lunged. She didn't have a clean line without hitting Bane. She took a step to fix it, and the world did what worlds do when men have put too much motion into them. It added more. From the south end of town, the new riders rolled to a stop. Badges glinted where they shouldn't. The man in front wore a smile and a mustache and the kind of coat that says a man owns a mirror. He raised an empty hand in a peaceable shape. "Well now," he called, voice big enough to be a tent, "what a day we've chosen to arrive. I'm Deputy Marshal Hollis, 5th District." The badge said Marshal the way a counterfeit says gold. Maybe it would pass under lamplight, not under sun. Voss didn't look back. He drove his weight at Bane's boot and the Gelignite like a man trying to dive through a mirror to get to the story behind it. Maren fired at his shoulder and hit meat. He stumbled and banged his knee and kept coming, because pride will run on bone when muscle fails. "Hold!" called the fake marshal, and his men poured down the street sides like syrup, slow and sticky and covering everything. "All parties stand down! We'll sort this!" Maren's eyes never left Voss. "Pike!" she said, and didn't have to say more. The deputy's broom tapped once in the tower. That was the signal they'd needed once and hoped they wouldn't again. Not for fire, not for horses. For the thing they had built because she didn't trust the county to arrive before the bleeding stopped. Annick's boy stepped into the alley by the undertaker's. He pulled the wedge from the water cart's wheel. The cart had been chalked on the slight grade like a thing waiting to be useful. It began to roll. Calder came out with a pry, flipped a spigot, and gallons rushed. The cart hit the gutter, climbed it, and the water made a river of the dirt above the Gelignite. The parcel drowned like a snake in a sudden flood. Voss roared. He roared the way a man does when he has been denied not his life but his style. He pushed off and went for her throat like a man who had run out of ink and chosen a knife. She met him with the hard, small knowledge of elbows and leverage. He hit her like a wall. She gave him back his weight with interest. His breath went out on her cheek in a gust that smelled like old liquor and fresh rage. They grappled, boots gouging. The street's dust climbed their legs like smoke, and the new men with the shiny badges spread around them with holsters heavy and eyes gleaming hunger and judgment and maybe opportunity.
"Stand down!" Foe Hollis called again, but this time the call had edges aimed at her, not at Voss. She heard the emphasis and tasted its poison. Men who look like Hollis like men who look like Voss and prefer women who look like her to be problems they can catalog. Voss twisted. He was strong and quick and wrong. She let him be wrong. She rolled with him and left him the space he thought he could use, then took it away with a knee and a grip that turned his wrist where it didn't want to go. "Yield," she said, because the word mattered to her. "Yield and live." He spat blood and laughter together. "I don't do either," he said. His left hand flicked. He'd palmed something from somewhere. A vest knife, small and mean. It came up toward the soft under her ribs. She made the smallest choice that makes the largest difference. She gave him an inch the way you give a dog the end of a leash to keep it from breaking its neck. She turned the knife with the heel of her hand. She let it find her leather belt instead of her belly. It bit and snagged. It stopped. She knocked it free and put his wrist into the dust the way you put a lie into a ledger, firmly, with witnesses. "Sheriff!" called the false marshal again. And now his horse had crept to 10 paces, and his men's hands had found their grips instead of hovering near them. "Step away from that man and present your sidearm." "My town," she said without looking, and tasted the heat in her voice. "My street, my law. Your law ends at the county line, and the county line ends at my say-so." Voss bucked and found empty air and another handful of dust. She had him. She knew it. He knew it. The street knew it. The men with the shiny badges pretended not to. Marin's heart did a hard, fast thing against her ribs. She didn't like the shape of any of the paths next. She could put irons on Voss and hand him to men who would let him go. She could finish him and hand the town a legend and a problem in the same breath. She could try to do the right thing the right way and watch it be taken apart by men whose job was to take apart right things with a smile. Lorraine's voice slid in beside her like a scalpel. "Look," the doctor said, and tipped her chin without lifting her hands from a patient she yanked halfway through her door. Marin looked. On the hotel roof, the first sharpshooter had crawled to the far side. He was low, and he was moving for the back ladder. He meant to run. On the bank roof, the second had sat up and held both hands away from everything that could give them purpose. He meant to surrender. Small mercies. She banked them. "Deputy Pike," she called, and let the honorific land where it could do the most work. "Yes, Sheriff," Pike called, from the tower, and his voice had the flat weight of paper you can swear on. "I see it, I testify." The false marshal laughed. "Boy, you'll testify what I tell you." "Boy works for me," Marin said, and her own laugh came out harsher than she meant. "He testifies to what he sees."
"Then he'll see a federal warrant and your badge in my hand," the man replied, friendly as molasses and twice as smothering. He swung down easy and sauntered close enough that she could count the cheap stitching on his belt. "Miss Calloway, is it? You've caused quite a stir." "Garnet Creek stood up for itself," she said. "I helped it keep its feet." "By resisting arrest," he said. "By interfering with a federal operation." "Whose?" she asked, genuinely curious how far his nerve would take his mouth. "Why, mine," he said, and tipped his hat. "And my partner's." He gestured, and out from behind him rode a smaller man with the look of an accountant who had decided one day to aim a gun at numbers until they behaved. The smaller man's eyes slid past Voss to the bank doors and the undertaker's sign and the drowned gelignite in the gutter. He did some quick math and frowned because the sum wasn't what he'd hoped.
Voss felt the mood changing and tried to become slippery inside her grip. She tightened and gave him a small, respectful pain to remind him of the world's size. "Miss Calloway, is it? You've caused quite a stir." "Garnet Creek stood up for itself," she said. "I helped it keep its feet." "By resisting arrest," he said. "By interfering with a federal operation." "Whose?" she asked, genuinely curious how far his nerve would take his mouth. "Why, mine," he said, and tipped his hat. "And my partner's." He gestured, and out from behind him rode a smaller man with the look of an accountant who had decided one day to aim a gun at numbers until they behaved. The smaller man's eyes slid past Voss to the bank doors and the undertaker's sign and the drowned gelignite in the gutter. He did some quick math and frowned because the sum wasn't what he'd hoped. Voss felt the mood changing and tried to become slippery inside her grip. She tightened and gave him a small, respectful pain to remind him of the world's size. "This is simple," Fay Collis announced. "Turn over your prisoner, if he is that, to the 5th, and we'll see he answers for the Hemlock payroll. You, Sheriff, will accompany us for questioning." He smiled with all the sincerity of a saloon painting. "We're all friends of order here." Marin looked at his badge and saw the lie in its shine, and looked at his men and saw how their boots pointed not toward duty, but toward the places a man imagines fun to be. She looked at her town and saw eyes at windows and hands on latches, waiting to know which story they would live inside come noon. She looked at Voss and saw not a man, but a choice. "Pike," she said, "bring me the town book." He hesitated the length of a heartbeat because he was the kind of man who understood that paper is as dangerous as powder. Then he moved. He vanished from the tower. He reappeared at the office door with the ledger under his arm. He walked out into the street like a man carrying something that could break and needed to, and handed it to her. She kept her knee on Voss and opened the book one-handed to the page she had started her first day with the badge, a list of the living. Not property, people, names. She had written them with the careful handprinting her mother would have liked had she lived to see it. She held the page up to the light and let the false marshal see the neat columns, the little annotations, who owed who had promised what, who had kept their promise. She did not say anything. She let him do the reading a man like him hates most, the kind where a woman doesn't explain. He laughed again, but this time it had a small crack. "That ain't law." "It is here," she said. "And the man under my knee broke it. He did it in front of witnesses. He did it with a weapon. He did it with intent. He stays here until the county judge comes. If you are who you say, you can ride to Hemlock and bring your papers back signed in a handwriting I recognize." "And if I say no?" he asked. His men spread a little more, as if kindness could be accomplished by geometry. "Then you try to take him," she said, "and you call down on yourself the only thing heavier than a bell." She looked up at the windows and didn't have to say the word she meant. The town said it for her by breathing in the same rhythm, together. For a moment, for a single bright, terrible moment, she thought the false marshal might laugh and draw and die and make the story simple. He didn't. He looked at Voss, and Voss looked back with the cautious hope of a fox who had found a bigger fox. Then Hollis's eyes slanted to the drowned gelignite and the bell lying like a fallen planet and the way her people had made an ordinary street into a machine of survival with rope and water and salt and a broom. "What a day," he said mildly. "What a God-forsaken little day." He shifted his weight and smiled a new smile that sat easier on his face, one that didn't promise anything, but didn't have to. He tipped his hat. "All right, Sheriff, have it your way, for now." He wheeled his horse and started south at a gentleman's pace. His men followed. The last one looked at her and spat in the dust because he didn't know what else to do that would scratch the itch in his pride. They went over the ridge and left the dust to figure out what it had meant.
Marin let a breath out through her teeth. She felt the world tilt and right itself like a wagon hitting a rut and problem-solving. Beneath her knee, Voss twitched and tried to make a last small story for himself. She tightened enough that he stopped. "Cuff him," she said to Pike, and Pike was there with the irons he had cleaned this morning the way some men pray, quietly, with hope of use and fear of it. The cuffs clicked. The sound traveled the street and put a fresh spine into people. Doors opened. Heads appeared. The air changed. Lorene stepped out with a towel over her shoulder and blood on her forearms to the elbow. "Hold still," she told the day, and it did. She looked Marin over fast and professional, pressed the cut on the forearm with a strip of linen, checked the ribs with her fingers the way a mason checks for cracks. "You'll live to be stubborn again," she pronounced, "after you let me stitch." "After I get him out of spitting distance of my bank," Lorcan Yuille said, surprising himself with the heat in his voice. He had a ledger in one hand and a small pistol in the other, held like a pencil. He looked at the pistol, frowned, and put it away. He looked at Marin, swallowed, and nodded once. "Thank you." Bainslate touched his hat brim from where he'd stood on the Gelignite. "Want me to set this in the trough, Sheriff?" "In the river," she said, "and let the water have the rest." He nodded and moved with a man's patient care toward a thing that hated being moved. For a handful of breaths, the street felt like a place that had survived the weather. Then a single sound punctured it, a whistle, high and quick from the south ridge. Marin's spine knew it a breath before her mind did. She turned. On the ridgeline, the false marshal had stopped just where a man can look back and see a place and feel bigger than it. He raised his hand and dropped it. From the arroyo beyond the undertaker's yard, something thumped. Not hoof, not boot, a different weight. The kind of weight you have to build a sled for. "Down!" Pike shouted from the tower a heartbeat after she'd already grabbed the iron ring on the doctor's porch and hauled herself behind the post. A shell skated into the street with a sound like sin. Top hammer, stubby, painted a cheerful blue the way cruel machines sometimes are. Cannon, not full-gun army. Swivel, field piece a man like Hollis could borrow from a friend who liked to make points. It hissed once as if thinking about its purpose, then it burst. Light ate the center of the street. Sound took the rest. Marin felt her body become a list, shoulder alive, forearm hot, ribs complaining, ears wrung, eyes full of grit, heart finding itself. When she could hear again, the first noise she knew was a horse screaming. The second was Lorene saying her name like a question that already had an answer built into it. She pushed up. Dust made a new sky close to the ground. Through it she saw Voss roll toward the bank step, cuffs biting, eyes bright with the kind of joy men get when chaos offers them an alibi. The cannon's crew, two of Hollis's men who had stayed out of sight in the arroyo, muscled the little blue mouth toward the town's heart for a second bite. Marin reached for her gun and felt air. It had skittered from her hand in the blast. She looked right and left and saw only street and bell and shadow. Voss found his feet. He ran. Not south, not toward Hollis, north, into Garnet Creek, into the alley where the water cart had come from, toward the undertaker's yard and the root cellar whose lock Uriah had promised to sit on until judgment. "Pike," she managed, voice ragged. "The roof!" "I'm on it," he sang back, voice too bright because sometimes men make their courage loud so fear can hear it and leave. Calder tossed her a gun. It spun once and landed butt first in her palm like a bird that knew the glove. She ran after Voss, through heat and smoke and a rain of board splinters and a smell like the inside of a struck match. Behind her, the cannon coughed again. Ahead of her, Voss vanished into shade. She went after him and the alley narrowed, and the heat pressed and the world decided to show her the next test all at once. Uriah's bulkhead doors were open. A rope snaked down into the undertaker's cellar, freshly uncoiled, its end tied to something that was being dragged, not up, but along, a crate, the size men make for bones or bullion. Uriah stood with both hands on the rope and a look on his face like a man arguing with a river. "Don't," he panted as she skidded in. "It's trapped." I saw the little tin teeth on the crate's edge, caps, wired sloppy for speed. I saw the string of fuse trailing off into sawdust. I saw Voss's eyes light the way a boy's do when he finds a way to break a rule so completely it will sound like a song later. "Let go," she told Uriah. "I can't," he said, and every tendon in his forearm stood like fence posts. "If it slides, it strikes." Voss smiled at her from the shadow beyond the doorway. He had found himself a pistol somewhere, someone's dropped piece, cleaned by fate. He held it loose and sweet. He looked absurd with the cuffs on and the weapon in his hand, like a dog wearing a hat and meaning it. "Sheriff, do you want to count to 5? She didn't count. She moved. She put her foot on the rope higher than Uriah's hands and took the weight he couldn't hold anymore. She felt the line burn through her boot sole and into her bones. She smelled the fuse like a wasp. She met Voss's eyes and saw something there she hated. Admiration. "You keep choosing the hard right. Let me show you the easy wrong." He lifted the pistol in the slant light and sighted not at her, not on Uriah, not on the crate, on the little tin teeth. She drew the breath that would have to last her and threw all herself at the next second. And the world went white, like a match struck too close to the eye. Sound vanished under the light, then came back as a ragged tearing, as if the day itself had been ripped down the center. Marin's world narrowed to rope burn and the hot slap of air. She kept her boot on the line and her palm on splinters and refused to give either up. The Undertaker's alley filled with a chemical stink. Caps, not charge. Flash and fury, without the full hunger of powder. Uriah's big hand shook on the rope. The crate juddered, hungry to slide. The little tin teeth had sparked and flamed, but the fuse went nowhere, its end drowned in the wet sawdust that lined the cellar steps. Uriah had done what Undertakers do, thought of what's left and how to keep there from being less of it. Voss was already moving. The white burnt out of the world in ragged patches. Her hearing came back like someone opening a door a crack. He lifted the pistol again, his grin a boy's cut into a man's face. He aimed low, not at her or Uriah, but at the metal edge that would turn a slide into a strike. Marin didn't aim. She let the ears of bodily learning take the reins. She kicked higher on the rope, stealing Voss's angle. The line bit her boot sole, and bit through and bit her foot. Pain flooded up, sudden and syrup thick. She rode it. She drew and fired, not at Voss's head, that would make the rest of this simple and ruin it, but at his gun's front sight. The shot snapped iron off like a tooth. His next bullet would go anywhere but where he meant. He fired anyway. The pistol boomed. His round snapped into rock 2 feet wide of the crate, raising stone spit that pattered their faces. "Let it go," Marin told Uriah. "I can't," he said, but the can't was only the word you say before the thing you do because your hands know better. He loosened. The rope slithered. The crate bumped, then settled against the lip of the lowest step, sand and sawdust eating its anger. The tin teeth gnashed once and stilled. Voss didn't wait to see if his failure would learn manners. He pivoted on his heel and bolted deeper along the alley toward the backlots where fences were only suggestions and the livery's shadow promised horses for the taking. Marin followed. The limb-hot burn in her forearm matched beat for beat the burn in her foot. Her breath came steady in the middle of shocks. Behind her, Uriah sagged to his knees with the rope clutched like a rosary. "I'll guard it," he gasped. "Go." "Don't be a hero," she said without turning. "Too late," he muttered, and wrapped the line twice around a hitch-eye in his waist. The backlots were a chessboard of barrels, troughs, half-built crates, and griefs people didn't want to bring through their front doors. Bainslate's feeding pen loomed to her right. She caught a glimpse of him between slats, a shovel in his hand like a spear, his eyes on the street where the cannon had just ripped a second pronouncement. "South Arroyo," Pike's voice cut from the steeple, high, urgent, bright with held fear. "2 on a swivel." "On it," Bain called back, like a man agreeing to fetch bread. He heaved the pen gate wide, and a draft mare shouldered through, calm and cavern-eyed.
Bane swung onto her bare back like he'd been waiting his whole quiet life for that moment and pounded away toward the blue-lipped mouth that had coughed death into his town. Voss cut left, vaulting a low fence with a grace born more of shortness than training. He glanced back once, laughed at the sight of her still coming, and fired over his shoulder. The shot went wild, front sight gone, wrist sore. It broke the corner off a fence post. Splinters stung her cheek. She didn't blink. She counted distance in steps, and in breaths, and in the measure of a man's panic. His boot heels began to dig less neat furrows. His shoulders began to lift with each inhale, like a bellows getting impatient.
He slid across the livery yard, snagged a dangling bridle, and flung it half over a sorrel mare, whose eye rolled at him like a gambler bored with men who cheat. He didn't even have the bit in when Bane's quiet mare thundered past on the far side of the sheds toward the street, and Bane himself was already turning a look back that said everything. Do what you have to. I trust you to know what that is. Voss put a foot in the stirrup, thumbled, swore, landed in the saddle without dignity. The sorrel spun hard left, a horse's opinion made physical, and drove her shoulder against the pen's post as if to scrape Voss off. He swore again and struck her neck. Maren closed the last 3 steps and reached up and took him out of the saddle by the belt and the back of his coat. It wasn't strength so much as luck and an angle he gave her. They went down together, a tangle of elbows and hatred and dust. He was stronger. Rage gives men more arm for a minute than they paid for. He drove a knee toward her ribs. She folded around it, turned, made his weight help her, rolled him with a heel into the packed earth where horses' hooves had taught the ground to take one more impact without caring. The pistol skittered. He went for his left boot. She knew that boot. She'd seen men with knives there since she was 12 and had learned to look down when a man itched his ankle while saying he wasn't armed. She pinched his wrist between her forearm and her thigh and let the joint make his case for him. His breath went up into his teeth in a hiss. Yield, she said, because the word mattered, even if he'd rather die than understand it. He bucked and spat and found a handful of her hair and yanked. Her eyes watered from reflex. She rode the hurt and held his wrist through it. Yield, she said again, and the word came out iron this time. He laughed at her with blood in his mouth. Ask again. She did not. She found the little finger of the wrist she controlled and bent it backward with sharp, unromantic economy until the joint made the sound joints make when they reconsider their duties. He screamed, high and shocked, and the knife he'd almost gotten free turned into a loose thought. She flung it into a hayrack, and it stuck there humming. Then the street roared. Not cannon, something harder to parse. Wood on iron, men shouting in a new key. Bane had reached the swivel in the arroyo and introduced the field piece to his draft mare's honest weight. Calder had arrived with a wet tarp and an honesty of his own. He wrapped the cannon's hot throat while Bane slewed its carriage sideways into meltwater and stuck it fast. Pike's rifle cracked twice, not to kill, but to peel men off steel. Hollis's crew had aimed to reload. They were now busy with the physics of a wagon's sudden betrayal. Voss felt the tide turn and got stupid in the way men do when pride tries to outrun evidence. He bit her hand. Not a tactic, a flail. She cracked her brow against his cheekbone in return, a small gift, and his head rang on the hardpan. Enough, she told him, as if the word were a law he'd forgotten existed. And when he twisted, she twisted, and when he kicked, she made the kick become a roll that put his shoulders in the dust and her knee in the soft of his upper arm, where muscle becomes decision. The cuff still bit his wrists, fronted now by his desperation. She took her second pair from her belt with the practiced single-handed flick she'd learned on a long, quiet evening her second week on the job, and locked his thumbs together. Cruel, maybe. Effective, certainly. Men who can't turn their hands the way their brains beg them to get suddenly, usefully calm.
He went still. All the fight didn't leave him. It never leaves a man like that, but the part that had been running with ignorance sat down to listen to pain for a minute. A shadow fell across them. She looked up until Irene Ash's face tilted against the sun. The doctor had a rifle in her hands, held muzzle down, careful. Her sleeves were still red to the elbow, and she had a smear of someone else's soot on her cheek like war paint. "You done?" she asked, as if they were finishing plaster work. "Not yet, Maren. Hollis." Lorraine's mouth tightened.
The blue mouth's drowned. His man got sticky quick. He's smiling again. You know the kind of smile. I do. Marin hauled Voss to his feet and frog-marched him toward the street. He tried to drag his heels. She lifted. He's heavier than he looks, her shoulder noted. He hates that you know that, her gut replied with something almost like humor. They came out of the livery's shadow into the main drag's new shape. Smoke hung low, cut by wet. The bell lay canted, king toppled, rim half buried in mud it had made itself. The Gelignite was gone, carried like a drowned snake by Bane into the river, where it would sulk and dissolve and become a story he'd tell without adjectives. The hotel lintel was bit down. The Carrion Roses sign hung by one chain, like a lopsided smile. People poked their faces out of danger holes and turned those faces into the fact of living through something. Hollis sat his horse in the south mouth of town with 7 left around him. The false badge bright, the coat neat, the mustache untroubled by the wet air. He clapped when he saw her, light little pats, as if praising a child for retrieving a thrown stick. "There she is," he said cheerfully, and if the sun had possessed a neck, she would have reached up and wrung it until the daylight bent right around that voice. "Sheriff Calloway, Queen of Puddles." He tipped his hat. "I do so admire a woman who cleans up after a party." "Marshal," she said, and made the word ugly without raising her tone. "You fired a cannon into a town." "Swivel," he corrected pleasantly. "A demonstration, really, to encourage compliance. You used federal property on civilians without writ," Lorene said flatly. "We'll write it on a paper later if you like." He smiled at her. "Doctor," he said, and made it sound like woman. "I didn't see you there. You have the look of someone who has opinions and tools. Dangerous combination. Do you want a third thing?" "I have those too." Hollis's eyes slid to Voss like a fly to sugar. "And there's our errand," he said, and wiggled his fingers as if Voss were a coin he could make appear behind his own ear. "Hand him over. After Judge Klein sees papers I believe in, not before." The false marshal laughed. "Judge Klein is old as winter and crankier," he said. "He writes slow, I ride fast. The government asked for expedience, Sheriff. That's what I am." The government did. Anik Wolf, neat and ferocious, stepped to the edge of her boardwalk with her broom at port arms. "Or the railroad that gives you envelopes." Hollis's head tilted. The little accountant-looking partner on his right shifted in his saddle and didn't look at the undertaker's yard where his men had hidden the cannon crew. He stared at the bank instead, doing figures with his jaw. Marin didn't look away from Hollis. "You rolled a field piece through an arroyo and hid it from a town you were supposedly helping," she said, calm as reading a recipe. "You have a counterfeit badge on your chest, wrong seal, wrong strike, wrong motto. The 5th District hasn't used that die in 3 years. You think a woman wouldn't know what a die looks like?" His smile thinned. "You have a lot of knowledge, Sheriff Calloway. Careful with that. Men don't always like it. Men who fire at bells like they're game birds aren't the men whose like we measure ourselves by in this town," Calder Finch put in, stepping through the saloon doors with sleeves rolled and mop water still sloshing in the tub. Hollis ignored him. He always would. His eyes did that trick again, the slide past the people already standing to the place he wanted to stand himself. Voss stood between them, wrists bit, shoulders twitching like a hobbled horse. He tried to make his face into suffering that should be respected. It came out as something that wanted to bite without teeth.
"This is your last chance to be cooperative," Hollis sang, a little sharp. "Give me the outlaw and lay down your iron. We'll make our notes, and by supper you can tell yourselves you behaved with decorum in the presence of federal officers." "You're not federal," Marin said. "You're hired. And you're about to be unemployed," he said. "Put him in my hands before I count 3. He lifted one finger.
The men around him eased reins and thought about licking their lips. 1. Marin did not look at her people. She didn't need to. She could feel them the way a body knows where its hands are in the dark. She could feel Pike in the tower, broom laid aside, rifle balanced, breath steadied. Bane knee-deep in the river head-butting gelignite against current like a man moving a bull that thought itself sacred. Loreen a presence against her shoulder blades. Calder square in his doorway, a bar towel in one hand and courage in the other. Anik poised like a spring, Uriah's rope around his waist like a promise. 2, Hollis said, smile opening into the kind you rehearse in a mirror when you want to look like justice and intend something else. Voss shifted under her grip. Not a break, he wasn't that stupid. A test. A little roll toward the angle that would give him a run at the alley again if she was looking at the wrong thing at the wrong time. She tightened down and let her voice go warmer than the day for just one word. Pike. Yes, Sheriff, he called, immediate. Do you see the day? She said. I do, he said. Tell it true, she said, and then raised her voice a hair and let it carry to the windows and rooftops and the church door where a child peered and was snatched back by a hand that didn't want to be the hand that let a memory happen. All of you, witness. 3, Hollis said, as if pronouncements made by his mouth changed the shape of the ground. His hand lifted and then cut. He was faster than a man that lazy should have been. He had practice, and that's the meanest kind of speed, the one bought on other people's time. His pistol cleared letter with an ease that might have been pretty if it hadn't been pointed at the space between her eyes. Marin didn't meet speed with speed, she met it with path. She wasn't where he'd practiced shooting men. She was a half-step left of where his picture placed her, and she lowered her head to protect her face and let the round go wide with a wind-wet hiss that cut hair instead of brain. At the same breath, Pike's shot cracked and took the iron spur off Hollis's right boot. The man's foot jumped, one stirrup went empty, and his neat balance learned about humility. The boardwalk along the bank exploded into movement. Not panic, plan. Men and women who had talked the night before with her quietly about ropes and angles and what each hand could do took their places in the space they had imagined together. Anik threw her broom like a javelin into the spokes of a wheel one of Hollis's men thought to use as cover. The broom's shaft snapped and jammed the spin, and the man's foot learned about staying put while the rest of him wanted to run. Calder knocked loose the saloon's porch barrel and rolled it into the path of a second rider who was trying to bring his horse clever through too narrow a gap. The horse chose to keep its knees, not its rider's hopes. Loreen swung the clinic door open and then slammed it again in the face of a third man who thought a doctor's room was the same as any other door. It wasn't. Doctors build with different hinges. Hollis fired again, this time low toward her hip like a man who has learned from his first miss. She moved through it, felt heat kiss her belt where the vest knife had already left a scar, and gave him back a single round that took his pistol's magazine catch clean and let his bullets fall into his hand like coins from a broken slot. He blinked at them like he'd never seen bullets off a belt before. Voss shifted in the clamp of her knee. She let him twist. She used it to see him hard into the mud. Yield, she told him again. He twitched a smile that wanted to be a sneer and failed, and put his shoulder into her shin like a child trying to win by stubborn. She made herself not pity that. Pity is as dangerous as pride if you let it choose for you.
Hollis reached for the second pistol at the small of his back and met Pike's second shot, which took the leather strap and dropped the weapon into the mud with a noise the whole street heard. Enough, Hollis said, voice turning thin and flat the way men's voices do when their plan shows its bones. He lifted both hands. He hadn't meant to surrender. He meant to wait for another angle. But the angle never came. The river of the town's plan had closed around him. Even his men could see the current now. The last of the Bent Star latecomers faced what men face when their leader's performance stops selling. The difference between dying with a flourish and living with a smaller story. 3 of them raised hands, 2 clattered pistols to boards. One took the gambler's way out.
heel in dust, and flung himself toward the ridge like the consequence wasn't taller than he could run. Bane, leading the draft mare back from the river, watched him go with a horseman's quiet and did not pursue. Some lessons the land teaches. Maren walked Voss forward through the hush. People stepped aside for her and did not look at him the way men look at a spectacle. They looked at him like something to be put away. It never stops amazing a person what other people can decide to be together. "Deputy Pike," she said. "Yes, Sheriff," he said, down the tower and moving before she had to think about telling him anything else. "Collect their irons," she said. "Anik, Lorcan, rope, and a ledger." Yule appeared with the book as if he had been summoned by an entry. Anik had rope on her arm like laundry. Pike kept his rifle on Hollis and the men around him while he walked, a trick you only learn by doing a thing that costs you if you miss. He collected 12 pistols, 2 derringers, a beautiful nickel-plated thing that had never made a person better in any way, and a knife with a bone handle that had been polished by a man with nervous hands. He put them into Calder's tub. Calder set a bar lid on top like a hat. "You'll regret this," Hollis said conversationally to Maren, as if the conversation were between neighbors over a fence about how the weather is, and not what it was. "I regret a lot that didn't happen today," she said. "Let's keep the rest of it to small things." "You don't know who writes my checks," he said. "You don't know what I've decided to learn," she said. He squinted at her as if to find a chink between words and bone. "You talk like a schoolteacher and fight like a dog handler," he observed. "Ugly mix." "Effective mix," Lorene corrected, and pulled Maren's sleeve up to look at the cut she'd earned on the crate and the scrape at her belt. "Sit you down soon or I'll start telling your business in a tone that carries." It should have ended there, should have. On a line drawn in wet dust with a town standing shoulder to shoulder across it, and the bad men and the worst men realizing that more people together beats faster hands apart. But should is a story you tell children so they'll sleep. The day still owed them one more rupture. A cry went up from the hotel. Not a panic cry, a child's cry, high and furious and confused. The first sharpshooter, boy-faced under suit, had come down the back ladder and thought to vanish. He had come through the alley by the laundry and met a little girl there whose mother had told her not to move from the shade. The boy had grabbed her elbow without meaning to be cruel and meant to keep her still without knowing how. The girl was not having it. Maren was moving before her mind wrote reason on the motion. She had never heard that child before. She knew her with her bones. She waded through air and bodies and noise and found the alley mouth where fear makes everything narrow.
The boy had the girl by the forearm. He was shaking the way men shake when they can't stop seeing their own fear on other people's faces. He meant to run with her as his shield. He didn't know there were kinds of fear you don't survive by borrowing. He had his pistol out, and it was pointed not at the girl, but at the ground, because he hadn't decided to be a murderer and didn't know that all it takes to become one is to fail to decide. "No," Maren said, and the sound came out of her like a bell that hadn't needed rope. The boy looked at her with eyes too big for his face. He didn't even point the pistol at her. He just cried like he was falling without his skin. "Let her arm go," she said. "Open your hand." She made her voice a room he could step into. "Now." He did, because children are heavier than guns when you're not lost yet. The girl ran without needing to be told which direction was home. The boy's knees turned to question marks. He blinked and looked at the pistol in his grip like it had teleported there when his attention was elsewhere. "Set it down," she said, and he did that too. He started to say a thing, anything, even a lie would have done, and no sound came out but a wheeze, so he put both his empty hands to his face and made himself small in a town that had decided to be big. "Pike," she said softly. He was there already, behind her shoulder, present as a shadow on a hot day. "Take him. Tell the mother she did right." "Yes, Sheriff," he said, and spoke to the boy with a voice that had measured boys before and not made them worse.
Stand, son. We walk. Back in the street, Hollis watched the small exchange with a miser's fury, as if he'd just seen someone throw away a coin he meant to snatch. You coddle, he told Marin when she faced him again. You ruin the clean lines of justice. Clean lines, she said, and looked pointedly at the cannon stuck in the arroyo, and the bell half buried, and the blue paint chipped to cruel smiles. The only clean line I'm interested in is the one between doing harm and not. He smiled like a snake closes one eye. Then let's draw you a line you'll understand. He nodded once. To whom? To what? The accountant-looking partner he'd brought with him had slid not toward the street's center, but toward the bank's back. He hadn't gone far. He had gone far enough. A relay of men down the south alley had their hands on a rope, another rope, wound around something behind the assay office, something that would make their demonstration into a habit. Bain, she said, without turning her head. Here, he said, from the river road, voice level. Cut. She did not ask which rope she meant. There are some orders you have already taught a town to carry out by the time you say them. He was walking by the smithy, Mr. Virtue's place, where a coil of wire waited and a tool hung always where Bain could reach it without asking. He came back into the street with the nippers in his palm like a benediction and crossed the alley before the relay remembered it could pull faster than a thought. The handles bit. The rope parted. The men on it fell backwards into themselves like dominoes taught humility. The thing behind the assay office stayed put. A second swivel carriage, half-hauled, 4 inches shy of ruin. Hollis exhaled through his nose. That was the first true thing about him she'd seen. He wasn't a man at all. He was a habit of men acting together, and the habit had just been denied its next repetition. Habits don't like that. This is over, he said. We will be back with paper. You'll be back with a judge, and you'll walk into town with your guns tied by ribbon like it's a picnic, and you'll keep them tied until someone who doesn't look like you and isn't paid by you tells you when they come off. He looked at her and into her like he intended to make her smaller by looking. It didn't work. Nothing made her smaller anymore, that she didn't choose so a bigger thing could fit. Mount, he said to his men. None of them were fast about it. He put his heel into his horse and turned. At the south edge of town he paused and called almost gaily, "Leave the bell where it lies, Sheriff. Let folks see the shape of what happens when a woman thinks she can stand on a street against the world." She didn't answer. The world he meant was a small one. It had a mirror in it, and some men with envelopes and a cannon to disguise cowardice.
When their dust had gone from promises to the simple sky, Marin felt the shaking come. It didn't show in her legs. It sat somewhere behind her sternum and made the edges of the day sharp and bright. She put one palm flat on the bell's cool flank and let its silence be a steadying. "Sit," Lorene said, gentler now. She didn't argue that kindness. She let herself be taken inside and sat on the table that had seen men bleed over cards and whiskey and sawdust and the human wish for tomorrow. Lorene cleaned the cut on her forearm and put 3 tidy stitches in and swore only once when the needle resisted a scar that had decided to be stubborn. She bound the rope burn on the foot, which had already started to swell into the shape of a memory she wouldn't forget when it rained. "What now?" Calder asked from the doorway, not because he meant to be told, but because he liked to hear the next thing spoken out loud so it could begin to look like something he could set on a shelf. "Now we hold," she said, and drank water and hardly tasted it, and drank more. "We put men at the South Ridge and the River Bend and the North Pasture Gap, and we share the looking. We fix the door at the clinic and the sash at the bank and the lintel at the saloon. We write the bell, but we don't hang it. We write every name we have in the ledger double dark, and we put down what each person did today. Not for pride, for record." "Judge Klein?" Anik asked. "Telegraph," Marin said. "Pike, your legs." He nodded. He said, "I'll send." "Send to Hemlock too," she said. "Tell them their payroll's still in the county and that if it moves, it will be across paper first." "What about him?" Lorcan asked, a sharp little jerk of his head toward Voss where Pike had stood him by the window with ankles hobbled and hands behind like prayer gone wrong.
Sell, Marin said. Uriah has a second iron in the back room. We'll use it until the county brings chains they can be proud of. Voss tilted his head. You think you won, he said. No, Marin said. I think we lived. That's different. She slid off the table, and the rush of standing made her ears hiss and then settle. She took her hat from the peg where Lorene had hung it as if it were a person. She settled it on her head and felt the flow of the day find her spine again. Walk, she told Voss. He did, because Pike and Bain and Anik and Lorene and Calder and Yule and 20 faces at windows made the street the size of a hallway he wasn't going to be able to push through. They locked him in the cell that held drunks and men who wanted to fight their cousins and one boy who took a watch he couldn't afford and brought it back the next morning with $10 and a red face. Voss tried to turn the space into theater. It refused. Some rooms shape you harder than you can shape them. The afternoon stretched. It didn't put itself back together so much as lay down in a new arrangement. The cannon sat in the arroyo like a dead beetle in a puddle. Bain and Uriah and 2 miners from the hill hauled it on the flats with grunt and rope and will and walked it out of town with the leisurely shamelessness of men guiding trouble to the proper trash heap. 2 Bent Star prisoners asked for water, and it gave it to them and told them the rules for cups. They followed them because rules not spoken by a man don't make men less alive. They make them more aware of the air they owe.
They slept in turns. When Marin closed her eyes at last on the office cot, she was not alone. Lorene rolled a blanket beside the door. Pike snored very quietly on the floor with his boots under his knees and his hat over one ear. Marin let herself fall hard into the small dark where bodies make repairs. She dreamed of rope that wouldn't stop burning and woke with her hands already open. Dawn slid back over Garnet Creek like someone had decided they could afford light again. The telegraph called, a tidy tapping like a small animal asking to be let in. Pike sat up, hair cowlicked, and went to the key. He read with his fingers and mouth and then said, Hemlock's marshal says Hollis is not on his ledger and wants to know who signed his badge. Judge Klein says sit tight and he is riding. And, his eyebrows rose, Territorial Rangers are near, coming this way from the West Pass. Rangers? Bain said softly from the doorway, where he had appeared as he often did, big and quiet and full of news he hadn't meant to overhear. Those boys don't ride for envelopes. Sometimes, Calder allowed, because he had eyes and history and didn't like to be lied to even by hope. Sometimes they don't, Marin said. Sometimes they ride for paper with seals that mean what they say. They arrived just past mid-morning. 3, not a swarm. Their hats were plain, their coats dusty without theatrics, their horses looking like horses, not ornaments. The lead ranger had a face like an empty mailbox, lines where messages had been, but no news you could steal from him ahead of time. He swung down without hurry. He touched his brim. He looked at the bell, the cannon, the roofs, the cell behind the office shutter, the water line in the arroyo, the scrape marks where Bain had hauled something heavy with patience. Sheriff Calloway, he said. I'm Ranger Miles. He lifted a letter sealed with red wax, the impression crisp and legible. Judge Klein's hand. She read. It was short, a marvel of a man who had learned to pack a wagon without wasting space. It said in 3 sentences what a weaker man would have needed 10 to avoid saying. It told her she had the right to hold Voss until the county could convene, that any man claiming federal authority needed to show strike and seal variants she would recognize, and that if anyone fired another cannon, the judge had enough ink to ruin him for a decade. She handed it back. Hollis rode south. He'll come back, because men like that don't recognize endings. He'll bring paper he hopes looks real from far away. Miles nodded, as if she had named the wind. We'll be here when he does, he said, simply.
He glanced toward the cell where Voss paced, not like a caged animal, but like a man who thought walking in small boxes might keep the day from shrinking him. And him? Alive, she said. A lot of men deserve that, even when they don't. You'll catch hell for it, Miles observed without heat. I'll catch hell if I don't, she said, and went to the ledger. She opened to last night's page and wrote in a long, slow hand, Voss, Cutter, held on charges of attempted robbery, attempted arson, assault with deadly intent, conspiracy with unlawful militia, reckless endangerment by explosive. Witnesses, Pike, Lorene Ash, Calder Finch, Anik Wolf, Bain Slate, Uriah Knox, Lorcan Ewell, 50 citizens of Garnet Creek. She dotted the I in his name harder than she needed to, and felt better for it. Hollis returned at noon next day, because of course he did. Men like that love noon. It makes them feel like they've orchestrated something, when really they've only looked at a clock and liked its face. He came with 5, not 7, and with a paper held high like sacrament. Miles and his 2 rangers stood in the street and did not make their hats more important than their hands. Hollis stopped 10 paces out again. He smiled with his mustache because his mouth had learned to fake it without the help of his eyes. Marshal, Marin said. She stood with her hat low and her shoulders even, and her foot a little better wrapped so she didn't limp like trouble. Sheriff, he said, and handed the paper to Miles, not to her. Men like him always give paper to the person they suppose is correct, not the one who is. Miles broke the seal with a thumbnail and read with his face not moving. When he finished, he folded the paper in half, and then in quarters, and then in half again, as if making it smaller would make it less insulted by what it had been asked to be. Hollis, he said mildly, this is a pass for grazing cattle across the district line. You've inked new words on top. Poorly.
Hollis's smile didn't falter because it wasn't attached to anything honest enough to move. Paper's paper, he said. You gonna argue calligraphy with the federal government? I'm going to argue forgery with a judge, Miles said, and let the folded mess sit neat as a coin in his palm. You and your men will dismount. You will put your weapons on the ground. You will kick them away from your toes. You will put your hands where I can see them. You will explain yourself with fewer adverbs than you used yesterday. The thing that happened next was small, and either everything or nothing, depending on what you believe about men. Hollis looked at Miles and weighed power. Then he looked at the town and weighed will. Then he looked past them all and saw the bell in the mud, and the scuffed gutter where Gelenite had drowned, and the rope ends that didn't lead to a cannon. He tasted what he didn't say, and for the first time, his smile stopped looking like a mask and started looking like a sore he'd been picking since childhood. Fine, he said. We'll do it your clerky way. He swung down with exaggerated gravity. His men followed. They put their guns where they were told. Anik counted them aloud in a tone like grocery. 1, 2, 3. It made the men look like items, not threats. Sheriff? Yourselves? Plenty, she said. Hollis snorted. You think this ends me? No, she said. I think this pauses you. Sometimes pausing a man is enough time for the town around him to choose another road. They walked him past the bell. He glanced down at his boot where Pike had shot the spur. The leather was new today, clean. The spur was back. He didn't see the difference. He didn't see that the man who put the spur right again was the same man who had taken it off and could do it twice more before supper if asked polite by the situation. Days passed. Not quiet. Quiet was gone, but steady. The telegraph popped with Klein's missives. The rangers snored like reasonable men when they slept in chairs against her office wall. Voss paced less. The boy sharpshooter cried behind his hands twice and then asked for paper. Anik gave him a scrap and a pencil. He wrote a letter to someone who would have to decide whether to forgive him. He sealed it with spit and a kind of hope Marin didn't have the right to measure. On the third morning, the judge arrived like a storm that had remembered why water mattered. He swung down from his horse with the stiffness of a man who had not let the saddle have his bones. He shook her hand as if signing again a thing he'd already done in ink. He read her ledger and did not correct her penmanship. He read Miles's report and corrected one spelling of yoke. He looked at Hollis and looked bored. He looked at Voss and did not look bored at all. He convened under the gallows that had been built and never used, in front of which she had once stood as a girl and wondered if any place would ever belong to her. It did. It did now because the people in it had decided that it did. He made no speeches. He took affidavits. He asked questions that seemed like they were about small things, the angle of a rope, the direction of a cart's wheel, but which put themselves together into big things: intent, habit, harm, reckoning. He wrote names. He scribbled figures. He thunked his seal down like a hammer. When he was done, Voss had a date to meet the inside of a prison east of the mountains and not many stops between. Hollis had a cart waiting to take him to a bigger room, where men in better coats would ask him to explain the difference between a pass and a warrant until he learned it like a catechism. The boy sharpshooter had a fine for frightening a child and a job sweeping the church in penance, because Anik insisted and Klein nodded, and Marin didn't get a vote that day because she was too relieved to be told this once.
When the papers were signed, the town exhaled. Not all at once, in the small ways that add up to breath. A woman letting a dish soak, a man leaning already toward the next day's fence post, Calder sanding a fresh plank to hang in place of the lintel, Dane currying the mare, Uriah taking the rope off his waist and coiling it onto a proper peg with hands that stopped shaking on the third loop. They raised the bell with block and tackle and everyone's long, sore shoulders and set it on a cradle on the ground. It would not hang yet. Marin didn't want it testing the air too soon. But it sat where the town could see it and be reminded that bronze can fall and not break, and that falling can be turned with a well-timed hand. That night the Carrion Rose was full but quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when people prefer to have their insides settle before their outsides start making noise again. Marin stood with her back to the bar and looked at faces. Not one of them was a stranger, even the one she hadn't met yet. That is what a day like that does to a place. It makes the unknown part of you look like something you were waiting for. Calder leaned over. "You gonna keep the badge?" he asked without fuss. She looked at it where it sat above her pocket, the star heavy, the pin-catch biting cloth that had learned her shape. "It's not a favor," she said, "and it's not a threat. It's not a costume." She touched it with 2 fingers. "It's work." "Work we'll keep paying for," Anik said, from a table where she had her ledger open and was doing the math of repair. "In cash and in listening to your orders when you're not charming about them." "I'm never charming," Marin said, and the room snorted a little and then let itself laugh because laughing wouldn't crack anything now. Lorene nudged her hip. "Sleep," the doctor said in a tone that wouldn't be argued. "I will," Marin promised, "after I write one more thing." She took the ledger from Yule's hands and turned to the page for the day. She wrote a line across the bottom as straight as a fence. Above it, she filled in 3 words and the date beside them. Garnet Creek stood.
She put the book back on the shelf like a person puts a candle down after finding the wick that still works. She went to the door and leaned on the jamb and watched her town be itself. That might be the best anyone can ask. Not to be left alone, but to be allowed to be what you said he would be when it rained. Miles came and stood next to her without taking her space when he did it. "You'll be more," he said. "Men who hear there's a woman with a star and think that means empty. Men who think a place that fights clean is soft." "I know. They'll learn." He nodded. "We'll ride a while. Long enough that if a train comes with a badge behind it, there's a second badge standing in the way with a different man's ink on it. Tell Klein thank you. I don't carry thanks. I carry paper." But he smiled a very small smile that looked like gratitude's neighbor. When they were gone, and the night had gotten old enough to yawn, she walked the street one last time. The bell's shadow was a dark coin on the ground in the moon's thin light. The clinic window glinned. The bank sash was whole again. The liveries smelled like hay and horse and clean sweat. The undertaker's rope was on its peg where it belonged. The cannon was nowhere a person could trip over it in the dark. She stood in the center of Maine and took her hat off and felt the air touch her hair as if it were gentle on purpose. She thought of her mother for the first time in weeks. Not a picture, not a speech. Just a weight of hands that had taught her a thing without being able to name it. The difference between fear and attention. She had paid attention. She would keep paying. Behind her, Pike's boots scuffed the boardwalk. "Sheriff?" "Yes," she said, turning. "Judge left something for you." And he held out a paper she took with her hands, cleaner than they'd been at noon. It was not fancy. Klein's hand was spidery and uncompromising. It said simply, "Resolution of Commendation, Garnet Creek," for standing. Beneath it, names. Beneath that, the kind of signature a man makes when he is proud and doesn't want to admit the word out loud. She laughed softly. She kept the sound small so it wouldn't fly away. "We'll hang it in the office," she said, "next to the ledger, so people remember what paper is for." "Payin' and tellin' truth," he said. "And keepin' promises," she added. "Even the ones you make in your head when no one can hear them." He nodded. "I'll do another round," he said. Then hesitated. "Sheriff?" "Yes, Pike." "Proud to work for you." "Proud to work for them." He jerked his chin at the town. "Both." She felt it hit the place inside her she kept clean for exactly that kind of thing. "Same. Now, go see if the wolves know the difference between our sheep in the deserts." He grinned and went. She stood until the cold told her a bed was a better plan than philosophy. She went to the office, put the badge on the night peg like a hat that had earned its nail, lay down and let her body decide she could sleep. In the morning, the bell didn't ring. The town didn't meet it. Garnet Creek woke up anyway to the sound of brooms and hooves and coffee and the kind of quiet talk that puts nails straight and argues about where to store the salt sacks now that they'd learned how much mischief a little sideways planning could prevent. Marin Calloway pinned the star back on and walked into the day as if it were a road she had chosen and would keep choosing. The badge didn't feel lighter. It felt right. The weight you choose is different than the weight someone puts on you. There will be another noon. There always is. There will be more men with more plans who thought they could write on a town like a piece of paper. She would be here with her ledger and her quiet and her attention and her people. She would say yield when the day needed the word, and she would mean it. She would keep firing as little as she could and as much as she had to. She would count, and she would keep counting. Not notches, not shots, breaths, hers, her people's. The number of sunrises a town gets to spend as itself when it decides to stand. And if anyone ever asked her about Cutter Vaz, she would say, he lived, and other men did too. That was the point. If anyone asked her about Hollis, she would say, paper took him further than bullets could. That was the point, too. If anyone asked her about the day the bell fell, she would say, "Bring me a hammer. We'll fix the frame and we'll hang it when we're ready. We don't need it to know who we are."